Welcome to tonight's episode of the Sports Science Guys. I'm your host, Michael Schiffer.
And I'm Jack Beatty.
And tonight, we'll be taking an in-depth look at Joe Theismann's career-ending leg break.
And what a doozy that was, Mike. Let's jump right in.
The year was 1985, and the New York Giants were playing the Washington Redskins. Joe Theismann, the all-star quarterback of the Washington Redskins, was in his 9th NFL season and looking to lead his team to the playoffs for the 4th season in a row. After back-to-back losses in the 1982 and 83 Super Bowls, the Redskins were chasing a Super Bowl victory.
First and 10, Riggins, flea flicker, back to Theismann. Theismann's in a lot of trouble.
The game was tied 7-7 in the middle of the second quarter when Joe Theismann, NFL MVP quarterback, hikes the ball and hands it to his running back. The running back tosses the ball back to Joe Theismann. They're running a play called a flea flicker, which is a trick play designed to catch the defense off guard. The play doesn't work as well as planned, and the Giants' defense is immediately all over Joe Theismann. New York Giants Hall of Fame defensive end Lawrence Taylor leaps at Theismann and tackles him for what appears to be a routine play until Theismann can't get up.
Theismann's in a lot of trouble. And it was Lawrence Taylor who slammed Theismann to the ground at the 42-yard line. The blitz was on.
What appears to be a normal sack by Lawrence Taylor, a Hall of Fame defensive end for the New York Giants, would soon be deemed the hit that no one who saw it can ever forget by the Washington Post.
And we'll look at it with the reverse angle one more time, and I suggest your stomach is weak, you just don't watch.
In the play, all 240 pounds of Taylor landed on Theismann's leg, pinning it against the turf until Theismann's leg snapped under the force. The result of the play was a comminuted compound fracture of Theismann's tibia and fibula. A comminuted fracture is when the bone breaks into two or more pieces, and a compound fracture is when the broken bone breaks through the skin. The injury not only ended Theismann's season, but also his NFL career.
Our skeleton provides us with a frame to keep the body supported and serves as an attachment point for muscles, tendons, ligaments, and joints. The interaction between skeletal muscles, surrounding tissues, and bones allow us to generate and transfer forces such to allow for bodily movement. There are two major types of bone tissue, cortical and cancellous, that together make up each of the discrete bones in our bodies. Cortical bone tissue forms a dense cylinder down the shaft of the bone, surrounding the central marrow cavity, and accounts for roughly 80% of the entire bone mass. This density makes cortical bone tissue harder, stronger, and stiffer than cancellous bone tissue. It serves the purpose of providing the bone with rigidity, which in turn supports the body. Cortical bone tissue is the hard outer layer that gives bone its smooth, white, and solid appearance. Cancellous bone tissue, sometimes referred to as spongy or trabecular bone, accounts for the other 20% of bone mass and has an open, honeycomb-like structure. It is highly vascular and has a greater surface area than cortical bone, which both aid in supporting the high metabolic rate associated with the tissue type. The high metabolic rate of cancellous tissue is in part due to the tissue's involvement in hematopoiesis, the production of blood cells. The words cancellous and trabecular refer to the tiny lattice-shaped units, trabeculi, that form the tissue. Spongy bone is less dense than cortical bone, which allows for greater flexibility when compared to cortical bone. Together, cortical and cancellous bone tissue allow for bones the ability to elongate, compress, or bend, depending on the circumstance. In the case of standing or walking, compressive stresses are those experienced by the weight of the body, and in the case of explosive locomotion, tensile stresses are those experienced on the bone as the result of rapid skeletal muscle contractions that pull the bone apart. Given the structural differences in cortical and cancellous bone tissue, it is unsurprising that the mechanical properties of cortical bone and cancellous bone are different. Bone is incredibly strong, but like any material, is able to be broken. For the purpose of strength analysis, bone may be simplified to be considered a composite material consisting of cortical and cancellous bone tissue. As such, the strength of bone, or resistance to breaking, is a function of the relative strengths of each material, and not simply just the stronger of the two. The force required to break a bone is dependent upon the angle with which the force is applied with respect to the bone's longitudinal axis and the bone's strength, where strength in this context is defined as the load at the point of breaking. When the force delivered to a bone exceeds the force the bone can absorb, a fracture occurs. In the case of Joe Theismann's leg break, his ankle is nearly pinned to the ground and was unable to be moved. In addition, his leg orientation prevented the free rotation of his leg about his hip in addition to his knee, such that Theismann's knee resisted in direction the incoming knee of Lawrence Taylor. The resulting scenario was one that will be approximated as a 3-point bending moment. There is great variability in the mechanical properties of bone depending on age, gender, weight, height, mineral content, and much more. For the purpose of analysis, a simplification was used, which considered the average strengths of the tibia and fibula in adult males of similar height and weight to Joe Theismann.
Before we can make calculations, initial parameters and assumptions need to be established. Lawrence Taylor weighed 240 pounds while in the league, which is about 109 kg. His 40-yard dash time was 4.6 seconds, which means his velocity at full speed when making a tackle is about 7.95 meters per second. We set our X and Y axis in the direction of Joe Theismann, so Lawrence Taylor's movement would be positive. After looking at the video, we assumed Lawrence Taylor would be in the air for about 1 second and was in contact with Joe Theismann for the second half of that. We then assumed Lawrence Taylor jumped and landed at an angle of 45 degrees from the ground. Since we don't know Lawrence Taylor's velocity when he hit Joe Theismann, projectile motion can be used to find it. Since velocity in the x direction doesn't change, we know the x component is always 7.95 times cosine 45. Using the equation for the y direction and the assumption that Lawrence Taylor was in the air for about 1 second, we found the y component had a magnitude of 0.716 meters per second in the downward direction. Now that we know Lawrence Taylor's velocity when landing, we can find the force of his tackle with the principle of linear impulse and momentum. Since the impulse vector is a sum, we have to account for the force of the tackle and his weight. When breaking the equation into I hat and j hat, we found there is no impulse reaction in the I direction since velocity in the x direction is constant. J hat, on the other hand, allows us to account for mass, velocity, and weight to find the j hat component of the force of the tackle, which is 2,446 newtons. With this component of force in the j hat direction, as well as the angle of impact on the bone, we can use basic trig to find the overall force of the tackle is equal to 3,460 newtons, which is within the range of the average force needed to break a bone. It was also of interest to find the moment caused by this force on the knee and ankle. To estimate the length of Joe Theismann's tibia, an equation related height in centimeters to the length of a tibia times 2.4 plus a constant of 81.7. This led to an estimated length of 0.42 meters. Since Theismann's foot was caught under Lawrence Taylor and the knee is always fixed to the tibia, we can assume the ankle and knee as pins, making this a 3-point bending moment. Since the y component of the tackle is in line with all 3 points, only the x component creates a moment. Theismann's break occurred halfway down his shin, making the distance from the ankle and knee about 0.21 meters. This leads to a moment of 525 Newton meters, where the ankle is twisted counterclockwise and the knee is twisted clockwise. This once again breaks the threshold, where the average maximum moment before breaking a tibia is about 408 Newton meters. As seen from our calculations, it is no surprise that Theismann's leg broke from the tackle. The combined force and moment resulted in such a bad leg break that Theismann was forced to retire, and his right leg is a full inch shorter than his left as a result of the injury. While the hit was completely legal and there were no rule changes because of the tackle, there have been rule changes to increase player safety, particularly for quarterbacks that have been put in place because of injuries like Theismann's. In 1989, just 4 years later, a rule was put into place that a defender in any direction who has an unrestricted path to the quarterback is prohibited from hitting him below the knees. This rule was obviously put into place to defend quarterbacks' legs and knees since quarterbacks are in a defensive position when throwing the ball. Other rules, such as the anti-stuffing rule, were put into place as well. The rule states, when tackling a passer who is in a virtually defensive posture, for example, during or just after throwing a pass, a defensive player must not unnecessarily or violently throw him down and land on top of him with all or most of the defender's weight. In Joe Theismann's injury, this was not the cause of his injury, but other quarterbacks have gotten seriously injured from unnecessarily violent tackles because they're standing upright, not ready to absorb a blow. Player safety continues to be a main concern of the NFL as more rules are made to protect players, but unfortunately, freak injuries like Theismann's will still exist.
And that was tonight's show. I hope you guys enjoyed the hit that no one who saw it could ever forget. I sure as hell won't.
What a hit that was, Mike. Next time on the Sports Science Guys, can you actually give 110%?
Tune in next week to find out.